Hey, folks, welcome back to The Pulse. My name is Matt. It is Right Side Up in honor of Steve Staggs. It's 11 o'clock Central Texas time, and I am excited to be back. We basically doing this once a week on Fridays at 11 a.m. I'm so glad that you could join. Today is going to be really interesting because we're going to be talking about the decade of deception, but we're also going to kind of free flow some things. I've been spending a lot of time reviewing content and basically the teachings of Steve Staggs that have been captured in 37 episodes on my channel. And it's incredible. We built a tool, ZZ Tesco built a tool that enables us to search by word and then literally go into the content, which is incredible. But it's amazing how there's a time for everything. And I'll start with this. Steve talked about there's this chronos time, right? The time that you keep on your watch, right? Kind of a chronology of time. There's kairos time, and then there's the fullness of time. And he talked about that in and you can use the search tool to find that information and learn about that as far as timing. But you know that there are times when you come to certain content and you get something from it, and then you come back to it and you get even more. I just absolutely having that same exact experience, right? The rabbit hole is deep. But what I've come to recognize is that there's a seminal work of Steve Sachs, and it is his 1960s white paper. And it's something that, as I go back to it, I realize, okay, this is so densely packed with his 40 years of walking and listening and talking with Jesus that he really gave us this tremendous gift. And I really feel like you need to read it. I mean, I don't care what your perspective is. I mean, you need to see this perspective because it's the whole thing wrapped up in one, and it's so well written and the case is so strong that you're just like, okay, something had started in the 1960s that we are actually experiencing the result of today. And of course, with the attempted assassination of President Trump or whatever it may be, we see that the stakes are getting higher, and we're seeing that there's we're living in a world that makes no sense many times, no common sense, all these things. And the 1960s white paper by Steve Staggs really tells the story of why it is the way that it is today. But it also gives a tremendous amount of hope because it's actually the forces the spirits of darkness are actually on the run. And you get to this point where you're not keeping things in quiet places or hidden, but they're out in the open and you're able to see them for what they are. But they can be extremely deceiving. That's the whole essence, is the lie that they propagate. And so I think if you're somebody that's really interested in how does this all structured, how does this fit in? Well, there's a guy, his name's Steve Staggs, and Steve Staggs spent time and just asked Jesus, right? And it's really interesting to me. I've been paying attention to a lot of different prophetic type of things that I see from people, and there's a lot of different language around this. But it kind of falls into two camps. There's a group of people who basically said, let's come underneath the authority of the Bible, right? So they're in their desire to dig deep into the scriptures, they've made that book their God. And that group of folks is just like, well, Bible, which, it has its place. It's a very effective tool. But then there's another group that goes the opposite direction, which is just like, very, fully spirit driven, right? Not having any interest or desire for it's experience or feeling driven. And what I think is incredible is what Steve shares and what he practiced all of his life is really a personal relationship with the one who has all authority, that all things were created for him and by him. And I think when you examine that perspective, you're like, wow, this is simple and it's true. And I've practiced that, right? Because when I first encountered Steve and this information, I was shocked because it blew apart my preconceived notions, this belief system that is kind of propagated by the church, if you will. And you're like, well, what is this really? Well, the premise is there's a living and speaking Jesus, right? The one who created it all interfaces with man. And of course, if you don't believe that, I mean, just go up the mountain with Moses. And what happens? He's shown the throne room of God. What is the tabernacle but a veil, a thin veil? But that veil, that separation, but a mechanism by which you can communicate. And what's interesting is, and this is my own personal experience, that I've been taught essentially, not directly, and I don't think it particularly intentionally, but a deception or a lie that Jesus was this good historical figure, and we now worship the Bible. That's my experience. And they go, well, hang on a second. Every Easter Sunday, we say he is alive, he's risen. Is he only alive on Easter Sunday, or is he alive all the time? And of course, there are a number of people say, well, the Spirit of God lives within you. Well, it's really interesting. How do you meet someone? I just think it's funny, if you were asking somebody for dating advice, you'd probably look them strangely in the eye and say, hold on, this isn't the right way to do it. When someone is advocating that you get married on the first date. And that's essentially what we're doing. This onboarding experience within the local church is to say, hey, meet them and get married first date. And what's interesting is if you were in a sales organization, and I'm sure many of you have had some exposure to kind of sales training. Well, what is sales training? Let's say you're a group that has a product and you've got a target audience, and you're getting into this, you started this business and you want to build a sustainable business. Well, what would you do? Well, you probably go around engaging with people in your target audience and telling them about your product, but more importantly, asking them questions and understanding their needs and basically talking with them, right? You don't like, hey, as soon as you meet someone, I'm expecting you write me $1 million check and the biggest order I've ever had. No, it's just not practical. It doesn't make any sense to do it that way. So what do you do? Well, anyone that's worth their salt in sales would say, well, I have to build a relationship with my customer. And what ends up happening is, surprisingly, some of the things that actually tie people together in a sales isn't the product, it's the people. And they build a relationship and they like each other and like doing business. And this person's actually interested in what my needs are and solving my problems. And we've built over time. I understand who his family is or whatever it may be. But you do that through conferring or talking, right? And it seems so simple. You're like, well, if you put it in a sales scenario, I want to onboard somebody and have them buy my product, whatever. That's an outcome, but it's really an outcome of a relationship if it's going to be sustainable. And what's funny is that's the structure of all like practical things in sales. Well, why wouldn't that be any different in the structure and framework of engaging with God? This is a person, right? This is a person that wants to be in communication with you and is giving you choice to do that or not. So that's a lot of what the 1960s white paper, what we're going to talk about today is rooted in that. And then we're gonna jump into some really interesting clips from Steve today. But let's say hello to you, and then we'll jump into some resourcing. If I want to accomplish anything today, it's I want to convince you to join our Telegram channel, even if it's just to come in and grab the 1960s white paper. It's a pinned comment. It's linked in the description, and you read that. If there's any goal I have of this stream, it would be that. Read that 1960s white paper. It's everything over all 37 episodes condensed into some of the most, poignant or pithy writing. And it's incredible. So I'd encourage you to do that. Mike Austell. So folks, just so you may know this, but Mike has had a challenge. I believe it's with retina lens, something issue there with his eye. And anyway, it's causing him to not be able to read, and it's really, really difficult. But he's got such a great attitude. Mike Austell, good morning all from Blind Mike, possibly of surgery on August 6th. This has been one of the toughest things I've ever done. And Mike's done some pretty tough things, but I know God has a plan and Jesus is alive. And it's interesting. You think of I think of Paul being blinded when he meets Jesus, right? Literally knocked on his can off his horse, blinded for a period of time. And what I love about that, Jesus actually speaks to him and says, "Why are you persecuting me?" And of course, he's transformed and he goes to a man on Straight Street. I think it's so incredible that Jesus, this concept of doing things with Jesus, that he had a man in the next city in Damascus who was on Straight Street, literally gave him his address. And he went to this man, and this man was the agent by which his eyes were open. It's amazing. There's spiritual vision, there's real practical vision, and it's what an interesting time to see, literally to see both perspectives. So, Mike, we are with you, and we know Jesus is with you as well. Ego Foundation, hello, my friend. It is good to see you. I got your message. We should connect. I've been crazy busy with some amazing things happening on my end. Sam Kemp, morning. Quick hello before I clock into the TNM. Work at the Texan Theater. I'll tell you, there's tireless. Sam Kemp is tireless in his efforts to support the Texas nationalist movement. So, in Texas independence, he's fighting for all of us and his great grandkids. Bearded Saint, what's up, dude? Great to have you back with the wrench. Yep, repeat. Finn Bear, what's up, Finn Bear? Good to see you, man. Behind the wheel. Appreciate you driving along with us today. Crypto Bigfoot, have a blessed Friday, all. Carter Hill, what's up, Carter Hill? Carter Hill has read the 1960s white paper many times. Awesome paper, reveals the kingdom. So I want to jump into a couple things. I want to share with you. I basically pulled an overview, and literally, this is my best, at least that I have today, to convince you to read the 1960s white paper. So I'm telling you in advance what my plan is. But I want to share with you this, because this is an overview. I just pulled a chat GPT, uploaded it, and just did an overview. I want to give you a taste of the things that you're going to see in this 1960s white paper in a summary format, because I want to make the case that you have to read it. And in that process, I'd encourage you, ask Jesus to show you what you need to see and hear in this. Okay. So I'm going to read this. The document, white paper, 1960s, by Stephen R. Staggs, is a comprehensive examination of the spiritual strategies mobilized in the 1960s by the Kingdom of Darkness. The paper discusses how these strategies have shaped modern American society and have the world at large. So this is really interesting. So Steve lived through this time in America, right, where these, spirit of darkness influenced things. And he talks about what we're experiencing today is the result of what he saw and what has been revealed to him through his conversation with Jesus about what was going on. So if you want to really understand what's happening today, there couldn't be a better document to read and to consider and to talk to Jesus about than this, because a lot of people are having a hard time. How do I make sense of what is happening today? And a lot of times you're looking through these political lenses and, social media, you don't know what's true. Well, this actually outlines not only the framework, but the way in which you can engage and understand what is true, and not advocating that the 1960s white paper is all the truth. It is the framework by which you discover and understand with Jesus the actual truth, because he is the truth. Strategic shift in the 1960s. So something happened, and in the paper he outlines all of the things that happened really since the birth of America, and almost not really by decade, but by these kind of seasons. And this one being a strategic shift in the 1960s. The 1960s saw significant breaks from traditional norms, leading to shifts in American attitudes, culture, and law. These were not random, but intentional, revealing a deeper strategic design aimed at dismantling traditional values, exploiting youth, controlling institutions, and inverting God's authority structure. Wow, that sound familiar? So what started and how it impacted and what it's grown into, Steve often said, and he starts the white paper with that decisions are the seeds of reality's harvest. Number 2, spiritual warfare. The paper describes the ongoing spiritual battle, highlighting the kingdom of darkness' attempt to outwit Jesus by packaging destructive strategies as rights. Wow, amazing. These strategies target human choices and decisions, which are crucial in exercising authority and ruling on earth. And a big part of this paper is you understanding how significant your choices are because of who you are and who you were made to be in Him. 3, human role and authority. Humans, both male and female, have been given the power to choose and decide, which the kingdom of darkness aims to control. By manipulating what people see, hear, think, believe, and decide, these powers can influence human actions and rulership on earth. You know what's amazing, just as an aside here, what I learned from Steve is the impact um, and really the authority that we have. We talked many times, or like if you'd ask 100 people on the street, who's more powerful, man or angels? And like 99% of people be like, oh yeah, the angels, they're super strong. Oh no. One of the first conversations I ever with Steve, he said, we've forgotten who we are. That's something else I think is so huge in this paper, and why you should read it. That's what I'm going to encourage you to read it. Read it with Jesus. That's my actual recommendation there. Um, so let me scroll up here on this document. So that's 3. 4. Consequences of the 1960s strategies. The decisions made in the 1960s have led to profound changes in society, with many now accepting these changes as normal. This acceptance has allowed the kingdom of darkness to to embed its strategies deeply into societal norms. So we're reaping this, if you will, of what was sown back in that time. And then the game. The paper also describes the strategic and military nature of the battle, comparing it to a game where deception and misdirection are key tactics used by the kingdom of darkness to achieve its goals. 6. Jesus' role and vision. Despite the advantages of the kingdom of darkness, Jesus is portrayed as being far ahead, using these events to serve his purposes. The ultimate goal is for humans to rule creation with him in the fullness of his nature and character. So, not only defining what happened during this time, but the fact that there is a plan, overarching plan, and even though these the ones that want to deceive, want to basically get into man's authority of the decisions he makes and literally change his mind and believe a lie. And it's interesting to me is that we're so used to going our own way, right? That's is this concept of sin that, hey, I got this, I don't need you, versus one that is with Jesus where you're like, hey, how do you see this and how does that inform my decision making? Because if you understand the authority that you have and how valuable it is, it will blow your mind. And I think that that's, you think about, there's so many people who have been convinced that they're victims, or, massive anxiety and depression and all of these things that come in, fear. Well, when you're crippled by fear, you are not strong. And how many times does it say you should be strong and courageous? Well, how do you do that? Is that something you muster, or is that something you do with Jesus? Because he is the author of it all. And want to talk about strength. Family and media influence. The paper discusses how media and entertainment, such as the show Family Guy, reflects and propagates the value of the kingdom of darkness, particularly inverting the family structure and mocking divine principles. Interesting. Overall, the paper aims to inform readers of these spiritual realities and encourage them to shift their focus towards Jesus and his plans. The extensive use of scripture references reconstructed using Strong's definition. So when he does reference these things, and this is all footnoted within this document, it underpins the arguments made throughout the document. So to me, as I continue to go back to this paper, I realized, okay, what was Steve's goal? And he speaks. It's incredible as I review these videos with Steve, and we're going to play a clip here from Steve. It's amazing to me that so much encouragement from him to just go and ask him yourself. And it's so cool because I did it live, and then I'll listen again, and then I'll share it with you. And it's like, wow, he had so much patience and energy and desire to share something so profound because it represents the truth of the how all of this stuff is constructed. If you think about scientists, what are scientists doing? They're like, hey, let's look at this thing and test it and see, how it works. Well, Steve applied that same kind of structure and rigor and discipline to spiritual things. Just ask Jesus, hey, and think about it. What if you knew you could go to someone that knew the truth? Well, probably be easier to make decisions. And you think about that decision at the very beginning. And that's where we're going to pick things up right now with a awesome Steve Staggs clip here. I'm going to share two clips. This is from episode 32 when we had Frank Molina on. And we're going to start at 141. Let's make sure we're not going too fast. I listen to these things at really, really fast speed. All right, here we go. Our friend Steve Staggs. I relate to that? Well, because this guy Steve said, hey, Jesus is alive and he speaks. To think that the church, and what I have learned over the years, has been neutered so much that I would be convinced that he's dead, and only we talk about him historically rather than one who speaks. Because I told you the other day that literally the pastor from the pulpit said, you need to come underneath the authority of the Bible. And it sounds like to somebody who's like, well, that sounds kind of nice. What are we really saying? We're saying if I have to come underneath the authority of the Bible, that means that Jesus is not alive and he does not speak. Because if it's a testament, it is a testimony.
Yeah.
If it is a testament, it is a testimony. And what is my testimony? He's alive and he speaks.
Yeah, right on.
And every single thing that I see suggests that everyone's been talking to him since the beginning.
Yeah.
And he's conferring with the others, and that this isn't all there is. And so as we come into this time where these things are being exposed and they're on the run, I think the level of potential deception is only on the rise.
Yes. There's a desperation, and there is a desperation in the kingdom of darkness, and desperate people do desperate things.
Yes.
They no longer function intelligently. They no longer care about how they're perceived. They just care about surviving. And that is what we're observing.
Yeah.
I mean, for, people in my generation, I hear you talk sometimes about, about the boomers and the Xers and all of that stuff. Look, I remember when all this stuff happened. I tell my grandkids, a little bit older, they're in their 20s. I tell them all the time, you haven't come up with squat. I haven't seen you go and be mowed down at Kent State University.
Yeah.
Haven't seen you do that.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen you tear down, other people's property. I've seen you burn stuff to the ground. I haven't seen a gun pointed at your head and the trigger pulled. Look at what you guys are doing. We started. Yeah. And I don't say that with any pride. I say that with, whoa, Lord, there was something in play that has produced this time. What is it?
Yeah.
What is going on here? What you see, for example, in the 60s white paper is the answer to that question. What the heck is going on? What started all this stuff? Where did the tipping point come that began it? Where's the tipping point going to end up where this thing finishes off? And what you end up seeing, very, very simply, when it's all netted out, it's, well, I judge based on what another person says, because that's what materializes reality. And so when the devil came in and he convinced my man to transfer all he was and all he had to him, guess what the mechanism of judgment is going to be for the serpent, for the devil? In the same manner, all that he has and all that he possesses is going to be transferred back to the one from whom he took it.
If you want that 1960s white paper, yes. Wow. If you haven't read the 1960s white paper, you can request it from Steve. Here's his email. He's got an AOL address, so he's old school.
Way of framing those. Go to the first slide again.
Yep. All right. Let me go zip back here.
Okay, the first slide. First question, is this what Adam and Eve saw in the garden?
No.
No. What did they see in the garden?
Trees that had fruit that you could consume.
That were beautiful,
Yeah.
gorgeous, full
And it was
of,
good. And it was good.
whoa, you looked at those things, gorgeous. So what is this slide illustrating? What I would offer for sake of time, now that I've asked the question to get you to think about, what is this slide illustrating? What was there but yet unseen?
Right.
This is the fruit of those two trees. On the surface, they looked identically the same. Beautiful, gorgeous, full of fruit, looking delicious, both made by the hand of God. And yet, what was it that the fruit of both of those would produce?
I mean, one was death
Ah,
and one was life.
right. The thing that knowledge does is it promises you short-term results at the expense of long-term destruction. And that's what you have illustrated. So you mentioned earlier about, these demons wanting, the sacrifice of children and hungering and thirsting for blood and human sacrifice and all of that. Well, why? See, we'll look at the dastardly deed, we'll see the wickedness, we'll see the horrific behavior, but we won't stop and say, why do they thirst for blood? Why do they do that? Well, there's this little statement that Jehovah was sharing with Moses that said that life is in the blood.
Hmm.
They have no life in them,
Wow.
and they are starving for it.
Wow.
And the only one that possesses it is God's man.
Wow.
And they can consume all the human blood they want, and they will never be satisfied.
Wow.
They will never gain what they search for. So the effect of their choice, which was to feast on knowledge, to give them short-term results without recognizing that it produces long-term destruction, they are forever and perennially thirsting for life because that's what they traded. Wow. Now, Jesus asked a similar question that if we ever got into it, we'd talk about it some more. But he asked the question, who among you would or what man is there that would trade his soul in exchange for all the wealth on the earth? What would a man give? Would he give his soul in exchange for the entirety of the earth's wealth?
Hmm.
Yeah, he said, what man would do that? Okay. Well, the smart man wouldn't do that. But the man who is exchanging his life for knowledge will do that every day. And until he changes that mechanism of decision making, he'll do it every time. By the way, we see that on the thief on the cross. The thief that was asking for him, what was he doing? Hey, if you're the Son of Man, come down off of there and then command us to come down too. What was he doing? See? Short-term results in exchange for long-term destruction. He just wasn't getting it. It was all about me.
Yeah.
So another thing that Jesus said when the disciples came out, and I'm pointing these so those in the audience can actually go look at these stories and read about them, that will help them. Jesus comes out of his time of prayer, and the disciples come to him and try to convince him of the suitability of the temple complex as being the home of God. And Jesus says, man, don't you see what you're looking at? For them, they were seeing this tree on the left side as in its present state of beauty. What was Jesus saying? Where it was headed.
Hmm.
Do you not see? Do you not recognize? Are you not seeing with your physical eyes in order to see into the spiritual domain the activity that is going on there so that you can make the appropriate choice? I'm telling you, while you see this as a long-term suitable place for God, I'm telling you, not one stone is going to be left on top of another.
Wow.
This thing is all disintegrating.
Well, when you think about
this slide,
when you think about, you mentioned this at our Gen Con, what is the building of God's man?
Yeah.
And it's interesting, Moses goes up the mountain, right? And there's some suggestion that he sees the throne room of God, and that there is essentially there's a reproduction of that, right? That there's this veil, and there's this place where God sits, and there's this place where you are. And of course, what is built after that but the tabernacle, right? And we think about, where did the Ten Commandments and Aaron's staff and the manna go? But in this place, and what was this representation of this thing? And it's interesting that, that first temple, and what was talked about how people gave to build that. And of course, fast forward now to this idea that Jesus saying, you are the temple of the Holy Spirit. You are an extension. Who are you? You are a son of God. And to think that that is a picture, that temple or that tent, but that those who gave to it, to construct it, right? In the initiation of David to give from his own personal wealth, and then the people to give what they could give to build God's man. And I thought it was so powerful to think that in this process of that, it's a representation of who we are in him, that
Yeah.
we are actually that temple. And of course, if that is analogous to a veil and approaching God, right? The physical representation of this interface with him. That what an amazing thing that the blood of Jesus provided.
Yeah.
And it provides this access, that is to say, no, it will be torn down in 3 days. It's so amazing. And then you talk about life and blood, and you're just like, oh my goodness, this stuff, if it's not technicolor, it's nothing.
Well, and then you go into, okay, what did the devil desire but the life of man?
Yeah.
So he took the life of man, whose name was Jesus, and what did he get in exchange? Okay? And he was thirsting for life to control. If you go down that track, you go, oh my gosh, this is way bigger than what I thought.
Yes.
And you have to hear how I say, this is way more than stuff being under the blood.
Yeah.
No. Let me tell you what, this is way bigger than that. And when you see that, it's like, wow, no wonder I don't have to worry about what is coming down the pike.
Yeah.
It can't get here unless I give it permission to enter. As for me and my house, that permission is denied.
Amen.
You have no access. Only one has access. That's what it is to bind the strong man. Nope, you don't get to come in here. And let me tell you what, it is, when that reality starts functioning and happening in your life, that is not a theological premise.
Right.
That is just how it works.
2 hours, Steve.
We kind of blew through that, didn't we?
We did. Okay, those 2 different clips. It started at 141, and then the second one started at 151. When you read the 1960s white paper, which you can get by joining the Telegram group, even if you just come in and out, it's the pinned comment, it's a PDF. Please read it. If there's anything you do, like, you may watch these videos and you're like, oh, I like these guys, I like the style, maybe the nice camera work, or whatever it may be. But what I'm realizing, everything that Steve ever talked to me about has its basis in what he spent so much time to distill down in that 1960s white paper. And it's kind of funny to me, the title does not do it justice. 1960s white paper. This is like, that's why I put on here Decade of Deception. But how interesting would it be? And I think, if you're just somebody that's just interested, that's the key. That's all you need to be. It's, all right, well, how did we get to where we are today? And how do I understand it in the right context? And the coolest thing about it, I think for me, reading the 1960s white paper and then engaging with Steve for 2 years and doing these streams and everything, has basically given me a framework of how it's built, and that, hey, I, as God's man, can interface with him. He's alive and he speaks, and I can talk to him. What do you want to know? Anything you want to know? Well, Steve practiced that, and I've experienced that to be true. And how incredible would it be, or is it, that so many in our world are middlemen? Does that sound familiar for a crypto person, right? Middlemen. Well, who are the middlemen? There are people all the time trying to put themselves in the middle to say, well, listen to me, don't listen to him. And they sometimes don't intentionally do it that way, but they present themselves as a proxy in between. They're like, yeah, I got all the knowledge. I'm the guy with the information. And that's the furthest thing from what Steve was. And that's what I loved about it. He's like, listen, don't listen to me. Ask him yourself. The whole point of this thing is to have this dialogue. I mentioned the sales process at the beginning. Well, if you're any good at sales, you don't get married on the first date, right? You have to build a relationship with your customer. And a lot of times the reason that they do business with you isn't just about your products, it's about you. Well, the same thing is true with Jesus. Like, are you interested in having this relationship where you would have access to the truth? I mean, look at what we're building with AI. We're building this chatbot that essentially want to convince everyone, and they're, all tools are neutral, but these tools could be used for evil or they could be used for good, depending on the decisions we make and how we animate these tools. But I can see it being one of these things where, hey, yeah, all the answers, infinite intelligence is in this, super intelligent AI. And we're building a golden calf in some respects. But the question is, who are you going to for the truth? You remember the movie The Usual Suspects? Remember that? Well, in that, Kevin Spacey played the character of Verbal, and Verbal was the devil. He represented the devil, and he says the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he did not exist. Think about this for a second. If that slide that Steve was talking about, he's making a really good point. He says the trees were they were beautiful. Do you think that there is one that's prowling around who is making offers that are beautiful and they look like, wow, look at this fruit. It looks really great. And what that slide represents is, would I want to have essentially eyes to see when I'm being deceived? Would I like to have eyes to see when I'm being deceived? I would think you would. I can't give you that. Steve can't give you that. Jesus can. That's the whole point. But if I can convince you that he's dead, he can't speak. But this whole thing is built, if you go back to the very beginning, it's built on an interface. It's built on a relationship. Moses doesn't go up the mountain to talk to a stone. He goes to talk to the one who created it all, interface with God. And that's what's so amazing when you start understanding this structure, the law, all of these things. It's amazing. Steve was in the line of Moses and Melchizedek and Jesus and all these folks. It's like, or all these men. I'll hold Jesus out for a minute. But all of these men over time and women who are literally going, hey, how's this thing structured? How is this created? And think about what was revealed to them. Hey, let me show you the throne room. Hey, let me give you these rules and laws so you understand, look at the Levitical laws, which were about the Levitical laws related to what you can eat. I encountered a doctor who was a believer, and he had drilled down into all the things that are outlined in the consumption of food, right? There's certain things you can eat and can't eat. This is all in Leviticus. And it seems so like, oh, well, you can't eat these things. Well, Johns Hopkins University, the medical group, had done a toxicity report on the flesh of animals. And guess what? They represented the same thing Leviticus did. Isn't that amazing? Like, all of these scientists are looking at it, and it basically represents why were you saying, hey, let's be careful not to eat the things that I created that were scavengers, because they're going to hold a lot of these toxins and things that are bad for you. What were the kosher laws? What were all these things at this time? I'm going to show you how it's constructed. In the early 1900s, when the medical industry was coming about, there was a Jewish doctor who was dealing with a lot of child mortality, right? So they were delivering babies and they were dying. And of course, he was a Jew, and he knew the Torah, and he basically decided at that time he was going to try something out. He said, I'm going to just dip my hands into water before I deliver a baby. Sounds really practical today, but it wasn't at the time, because what they found was that they were in the morning doing the cadaver work, right? Doing autopsies, dead bodies, right? Unclean. That's what it says in the scriptures. And then they were delivering babies in the afternoon, and those babies were dying. This was before they understood bacteria and all this stuff. And so this guy, Jewish guy, dips his hand into the water and delivers babies, and there's an improvement in the health of these children. They don't die, not completely. He was fired, ostracized, and kicked out of the medical profession at that time. So when you think about, there's a way that seems right to a man. So you're looking at these two trees, right? They look the same, but what do they represent? They represent all of the offers that are being given, right? What's true? What's not? They're saying there's a second shooter, all of these things. What is actually true? Do you believe that there's one who knows the truth? Or do you have to find it from, well, I got to follow Tucker Carlson, or I got to follow MSNBC? They're the ones who really know the truth. No, the whole point of this is that there is one who made it all, created it all, and is strategically at work, is alive, and he speaks, and you can ask him. It's an interface, and it's the whole relationship that's been built from the very, very beginning, that you can go to him. And when you start understanding that and laying over all of these things, like why blood sacrifice, why authority, and when you realize it, you're like, hold on, I've been participating in the promotion of this evil plan by my decision making, because I'm not seeing it for what it is. Right? What did Verbal say? The greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince men he didn't exist. Well, what is that? There's a way that seems right. I got it. I'll take it from here. And what do I do? Well, that fruit looks good to me, but not realizing that this short-term decision making, I'm going to get this knowledge, and I don't realize the long-term consequences of it, of this decision that I make, because my decisions are the seeds of reality's harvest, that actually who I am, the agent of God here, is really through my authority and decision making. And the whole point, the whole thing, is that we would do it with him, in consultation with him, in the fullness of his nature and character. What's that look like? You got to ask him yourself. You got to dive into this. This is between you and him, not between you and me. And that's what Steve taught me. And I love that. You know, so many people in my Christian experience have wanted to be God. And I see it now for what it's worth. They wanted to be a middleman. Look at me. And what does it say in the scriptures? They've received their reward in full. People that are saying, oh, follow me. I got this secret knowledge. I've got this information. I'm this prophet. I've got this thing. Well, it's interesting. You're then taking the thing that every one of us can do, packaging it and saying it's exclusively from you. No, you can know these things. That's the way it's built. But what does Satan and darkness want you to do? Want you to not believe that he's alive. Want you to come under the authority of a book. What does it say about itself in the Bible? All scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the man of God would be thoroughly equipped for every good work. It doesn't say, don't talk to the guy who wrote it. You worship it. And I've said it many times. Moses goes up the mountain and he gets the 10 commandments, and they are broken. So intentionally, it seems. Because what did he do? He didn't say, oh, crap, this thing is broken. Let's get some epoxy, put it back together so I can worship this stone. No, he went back up and got another copy from the author. Steve many times said, a new kid moves in at the end of the block. You want to meet him. And you're like, well, I better go to the bookstore and see if there's a book written about him so that I can see that. That's how I'll know about him. No, you go talk to him. And it's the same thing true with dating. If you've been married like I have been, there's a process by which you get to know someone. And how do you do that? You do it by talking to him. Jesus is no different. But if we can convince you that he's dead, then there's no reason to talk to a dead guy. And that's the whole thing. And once you see it, it becomes really simple. And in the practice, Steve taught me, it becomes like breathing. But what's amazing is that there's just a war within me that's wanting to go my own way. Like, I got this figured out. I don't need to ask him. Well, what did Eve do at the beginning? What was the lie of Satan who came through the serpent? Surely he didn't say that. Oh. And of course, what did she do? She's like, she listened to the lie. And instead of stopping for a second and going asking the boss, who she walked with Adam, right? They were with God in this garden. Instead of asking him, doing it with him, she decided to do it on her own. And she transferred her authority to Satan. And she gave it to her husband. They did this without. And what ended up happening is what we have, right? And this whole story, the strategic story of God's redemption in the world, is one in which his man, that's you and me, man, woman, we come back to him. We hold each thought captive. And we literally go, hey, I want to do this with you. Folks, I've had to go through really difficult times. And it says, consider it pure joy when facing trials of many kinds. And I have not found it true joy. I'm still learning that process. But it's like Mike going, hey, this sucks being blind. What do you want me to see, Lord? I've been humbled beyond being humbled. It's amazing. But you know what's, we all have, and if you haven't, get ready, you will be. But it's almost like you have to get to the end of yourself before you realize, I've tried it all myself. I've tried to stuff money in this thing. I've tried to stuff relationships. I've tried to stuff drugs. I've tried to stuff all kinds of things to try to get a peace that transcends all understanding. But I can't manufacture it. But there is one who is the truth. And it's like the peace of God that which transcends all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Well, okay. One of the things that says in the 1960s white paper, it talks about the word Yahweh, YHVH or YHWH, which is translated in the English translation of the Bible to Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. But when you look at the translations, you actually look at it, it's actually this Yahweh of the Elohim, which is the name of Jesus, the creator, the author. And it's really amazing when you start digging into this, you realize even the deception in the translations. Wow. So just imagine if I said to you, nothing is as it seems. Everything is a potential distraction or deception. Well, how do I know it's true? How can I function? How can I even move forward if I can't even believe what's in front of me and what is true? He's provided provision for that. Go to him. He is the truth. And he is alive and he speaks and you can talk with him. And I think that that's the really incredible thing about this. The woman that was at the well, right? She came during the hot of the day because she didn't want to be ridiculed because she was a hussy, if you will. And Jesus said, hey, give me a drink. And she's like, you're not supposed to talk to us, the Samaritan woman. And he's a Jew. And she says to him, you people, you worship up on that mountain, and referencing, the temple complex. He says, there's coming a day when you will worship in spirit and in truth. Through the blood of Jesus, we have access direct to him, to the author, the one who everything was created for him and by him. And what's really interesting is, the answer seems so simple, but it's like, what are we searching for? So many people are just like, I need more, right? And we think, and we place in that spot of where Jesus is everything else, right? Crypto, if I just had the money, it's going to be financial security. And what's so seems so happens so often is you gain this world, right? You gain all this crypto money and then you got health problems or whatever. And I'm not saying they're directly related, but the point is, it's like, you can't get away from the fact that there is one who is the truth. There is one who is the way. There is one who is the truth. And I feel like when I've seen what's happening in this world, it's making me take stock of what am I talking about? Part of the reason you haven't seen me on this channel talking a bunch about crypto is because I'm almost putting it in its rightful place. It's not the answer to anything. It is a thing, but it's a tool that can be animated in a certain nature and character. I think what's more important is the nature and character of the people. And this is way more important than that. And I'm so thankful that Steve was willing to take the time and Carter was willing to introduce me to him. And I could understand this because what did he do? He said, hey, dude, you don't have to get all cleaned up and get everything right to approach the living Jesus. No, you just have to be interested. That's it. Are you interested? And what's so neat about this is I don't do the supernatural work. That's what he does. And so even the deception of you need to get saved, that is a deception in and of itself, because it's like, well, What you're basically saying is, I go into the church and you tell me I've got to like make this decision to get married to this Jesus guy, and I don't even know who he is. So, in a way, the onboarding process is so kind of disjointed because it's like, hey, welcome in, brother. It's Easter Sunday. Get saved. Get married to Jesus today. And you're like, I don't get married to people I don't know because I'm like a practical person. And it's amazing. We force people into this. And then we wonder why they're like, are you manipulating me? No. What's amazing about the stories of people's transformation? Look at Paul. Jesus is alive and he speaks. Knocked him right off his horse. Talked to him specifically. He's not dead. Are you? If you're interested, he will speak to you. And will he speak to you in English or Swahili or no? It's not. And for me, I've been challenged with this a lot. I know KDM's been challenged with us a lot. It's like, okay, well, is it like an audible voice? Is it like is he speaking? Well, for me, it's different than what it was for Steve. But Steve cultivated this discipline of what he called crab walking, right? Because he was a professional baseball player over 40 years. And here I am, just getting started. And so this idea of how has it impacted me? I'm going to give you a really practical thing. I felt like I was emotionally getting drawn off sides so often, right? Almost like my whole life was around like exploding over emergencies, right? Setting everything was like people had to set their hair on fire, and you feel like you're getting jerked from thing to thing to thing to put out fire upon fire upon fire. And through this process and through this encouragement of Steve, what did I see in him but a guy who didn't have a panic button? And here I'm a guy who's got like 50 panic buttons. And what's been the nature of this is, hold on, this rest of going, all right, this is what the spirit of darkness wants. It wants me to be drawn off sides. Why? Because I give away my authority and I literally am manipulated by my own emotions and feelings. And what did Steve say? He's like, feelings and emotions are meant to inform, they're not meant to rule. All these emotional things and all these things that have captured us, being drawn off sides into these issues and overreacting to things is the plan of the evil one because it makes you ineffective. You're just in the stands. I can make you not a threat by getting you literally to be ruled by your emotions. He says, no, you will rule and reign with me in the fullness of my nature and character. Well, I got to know what your nature and character is, and you're going to inform me. So what do I do now? And I don't do it every time, but I'm getting better at it through practice and talking with Jesus is to go, all right, I understand that you're upset, right? I'm not going to be drawn off sides by this because whether I get drawn off sides by it or not, I still have to solve the problem. All right, Jesus, how do we solve this problem? How do you see it? And maybe this problem is there intentionally for a reason. And maybe the struggle and the pain and the issues we should consider pure joy when facing troubles of many kinds. And then you start seeing how all of this locks together. And you're like, hey, it's just like the periodic table or covalent bonds. There's a structure to it, and you can know it. The question is, I think what ends up happening is you start seeing these two trees that look the same. Wow, great fruit on both of these things. And what ends up happening is when you walk with him, he shows you what this one leads to. And what does it do? It's like that slide. It's like, well, there's obviously no life there. But if you don't have spiritual vision, well, how do you have it? It's not like I got to muster to go to get seminary. No, you ask the one who created it all because he's alive and he speaks. And the evidence is so, like, you start reading the scripture in this context and you realize Peter, James, and John go up the Mount of Transfiguration and they literally see Jesus talking with Moses and Elijah, the law and the prophets. Well, how can you talk to someone? Because they're alive. Folks, this isn't alive. It says in the word that, working out or beating your body or exercise has some value for this life. But the spiritual training that comes from talking with Jesus is helpful and useful for the life to come. And I would just say to anyone who's later in life, no fear. There is a life to come. This isn't actually real life because this isn't eternal. This is temporal. And that should give you a tremendous amount of hope. But folks, while we're here, it seems like there's work for us to do. What is the work that he's designed for you? Everyone is gifted differently, right? Many parts of this body. And what's interesting is you want to experience life and have it full, like in John 10:10. Do you want to experience the fullness of life? Doesn't mean you don't have problems or trouble. You walk with him. Well, how do you walk with him? Well, first you have to recognize that he exists and he rewards those who earnestly seek him. You're interested and you recognize that he's alive and you go, hey, what do you think about this? I heard a story through all this Republican National Convention stuff. And I don't know, I've just been watching a bunch of content and understanding what's going on and asking Jesus about it. And somebody said this story. Oh, it was Ben Carson. He was talking to Tucker Carlson. And he said there was a time in the eight when Benjamin Franklin was 81 years old. They were basically writing the Constitution. It's the beginning of America, right? The Continental Congress and all this stuff. And there was this huge disagreement about some topic. I don't know what it was. But guess what? It's so crazy. Benjamin Franklin asked the guys to do. He said, let's stop for a second and pray to God for wisdom. And they resolved that problem. Could you imagine that happening in the White House today? Can you imagine a cabinet or a group doing that? Can you imagine leadership in our country just going, hey, let's stop for a second and let's recognize that we're just men or women, mankind, and that there's a creator who literally wants to have us to have life and life to its full. But that we have to understand that there is this adversary who has gotten really good, and certainly within the season since the 1960s, has established a scenario in which we can deceive you. We can get into how you think. And if we can get into how we think, we can literally change your decision making. This confusion around your identity, who you are. I mentioned Tucker Carlson a lot. I've been really paying a lot of attention since he left Fox. And what's amazing about it, he's not a theologian. It is obviously clear. But he's kind of just looked at it for what it is, as a guy who's interested and curious about how things form. And he literally has said, it seems like there's kind of two different groups. There's a group that's kind of interested in, kind of traditional things that are supporting of family and, these basic values, kind of American values, I guess, which would be life and liberty and happiness and reproduction and, nuclear family, all those kind of things. And then there's a group of people that their outcome is actually anti-human. Well, folks, that's very, very clear in the scriptures. It's very, very clear when you seek these things out that there is one who's prowling around who wants to destroy us. Why? And think about this. I want you to not understand gender. Well, what's the core of gender? And if I can confuse you around that is I can affect your capabilities of reproduction. That's anti-human. What is this whole deal of, you can live forever, right? This transhumanist stuff, right? What is ultimately the result of communism and Marxism? And they were talking about this with one of the interviews, and it's like, well, pretty much the outcome of communism and Marxism is like 100 million people dead. I mean, you could just go through history and go, yep. And one of the guys said, you start looking at these things and you realize maybe that's a part of the plan. Maybe that's a part of the plan. And that's what's interesting is these things that have in the past seem to be veiled or done in darkness or be hidden are being exposed, and you're seeing it for what it is. And it's like, there are people who are anti-human. I don't know about you, but like, this thing doesn't continue in its natural sense unless we reproduce, and it's interesting that there's a group of people. I mean, look at the Georgia Guidestones that were blown up. They're literally, we want to reduce the population. Well, who are those that have literally been taken over by evil spirits? What would they be told, and what would they be telling you? They've given their authority away to these powers, these authorities, in in exchange for power and influence. And what are they telling you? Convincing you that you should kill babies, that we should reduce the population, that we should worship at the altar of climate science or whatever it means for the betterment of the world, that you should own nothing and be happy, that we are the elites and we know what's best, control, power. And you start seeing these things and you go, hey, Jesus, how do you see this? And you're like, wow, they're presenting two things that look similar, but one leads to death. There's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it leads to death. Carter Hill says, Jesus will keep revealing your/our true identity. Wouldn't that be cool? So many people don't understand, right? And been lied to about who you are and your identity. It was really sad to see this interview with Elon Musk and Jordan Peterson. And I wish Jordan Peterson would shut up and let Elon Musk talk. But he said, basically, I was convinced that basically I lost my son to this and didn't realize that it was like organized. It was an organized process of keeping my son from reproducing. I mean, ultimately, to sterilize him. That's what it. That's essentially what it did. And what is that thing? You think about this core that God has this ability of kind of the control of life and death. And what are the people that I see as aligned with evil forces? What do they want? They want the power to kill and to hurt and to destroy. The neocons, all these people that want perpetual war, they want to reduce population, they want to support essentially, euthanasia, they want to, the eugenics movement, abortion, all of these things. It's a direct affront to life. And we start seeing it that way. You're like, wow, this is pretty stark contrast. And so it's not really a battle between like the blues and the reds and the D's and the R's. No, it's ultimately a question is like, no, like life. There are those that are anti-human, anti-humanity, anti-life. Well, life is in the blood. If I can't get it, I'm going to destroy you. The greatest trick the devil ever played is to convince us that he did not exist. And here we're seeing it for what it is. Why? Because we're asking Jesus, and what is he saying? Hey, I know these things look on the surface like they're the same, but they are not the same. It's a look-alike. Wouldn't you want to know? Like if I said to you, minus all the Jesus stuff, if I said to you, hey, there's one you could go to who knows it all. You're like, hey, kind of interested in that. And there's a book, strangely, written by Napoleon Hill. Napoleon Hill wrote a book called Think and Grow Rich in the 1930s. And he was essentially commissioned to write this book by Andrew Carnegie. And Andrew Carnegie, who created all these Carnegie libraries in all of these remote areas in small towns in America, did it because his hunt club, where he was toasting the town, basically had a faulty dam because they dammed up this river to have this hunt club and this fishing club. And all the rich people, I mean, these are the magnates that built America, and they were warned that this dam was going to break, and they didn't care. And you think about just those that are rich and living it up at their club at the top of the mountain. I want to say like 11,000 people were killed in this flash flood that came when that dam broke, and he was so distraught over that he wanted to basically. He committed the rest of his life to being this great philanthropist. And so our revisionist history about who Andrew Carnegie is, oh, look, he was this great philanthropist. No, he had guilt. And he thought he could use money to pay it off. And what's interesting is he asked Napoleon Hill. And I don't know, obviously don't know Andrew Carnegie, well, but I know that the story is he was successful because, as he says, and I think this is like kind of the origin of the first modern self-help book from the 1930s, Think and Grow Rich, is that there is infinite intelligence. And he didn't want it to be a religious text, so they called it infinite intelligence. And basically, you have access to infinite intelligence, but you just got to know what you want. And you got to be committed fully to what you want. And it's an interesting book. I'm not advocating that that's the book, but it's interesting that without this concept of God, it doesn't work. And that's a really interesting thing is that you're saying, well, I want to get rich. Well, if you want to get rich, Well, look at Solomon, right? Solomon didn't pray for money, he prayed for wisdom. And what are we really desiring from all of this? I think wisdom. We want to we want to walk with him. And it's a moment by moment holding each thought captive to the the creator and that has all authority because we're facing lookalikes all the time. We're being drawn off sides. And so, to wrap all of this stuff up, I'm doing my best to try to convince you need to read the 1960s white paper. Click on the link, join the Right Side Up Telegram group. You don't have to stay in there. It's just in the pinned comment. Download it and like exit if you want. I don't care. But if you want to hang out with some people who are living life together, you can do that too. But to me, it's one of the most important things that Steve ever wrote because it's a consolidation of a lifetime of talking with Jesus. And the cool thing about this is you don't have to believe me or him. You literally can try it on yourself. And I think that that's what's so incredible is some of the least likely people that we would think would be like, oh, I'm a Jesus follower. And you're like, what? How is that possible? That's because that's his work. He transforms his man. I don't do that. I just encourage you. I jokingly said, I'm just one beggar helping another beggar find food. Well, where's it at? Hey, read the 1960s white paper. You want to talk about it? Let's talk about it. But it has been transformative to my life. But you have to get to a point where you're like, I've tried everything. None of it works. Like everything that this world provides just falls apart. And I think it's also a part of the age that I am now, right? You know, I'll be approaching this point in which my kids have kids. I don't have any grandkids right now, but I'm seeing a future in which I do. And I'm thinking about that as it relates to this life. And then also realizing that, hey, it's really, really short. I never believed my old man when he told me that, but it's true. And what's the point of it? And what's interesting is there's some indication that how you handle this side affects how you handle that side. Don't store up your treasures here on earth or moth and vermin will chew it up, but store it up in heaven. Well, what does that mean? What does it mean to store up your treasures in heaven? Well, what's interesting is that in this process of walking with and talking with and ruling and reigning in the fullness of Jesus's nature and character, we have life and we have it to its fullest. And we have this currency, this peace that transcends all understanding, which fulfills us more than, money. But strangely, we have insight and we understand the difference between, what is a lookalike and what is the authentic real deal. And what's strange about it is it almost makes you like Neo dodging bullets, brrr, right? Or standing there. And it's really interesting. The Matrix is such a great story for this because Neo he doesn't realize who he is, right? Think about this. This is really good. Neo, the one, right? Everybody's like, oh, he's the one. Is he the one? Is he the one, right? The Oracle said he's the one. Morpheus is like, oh, he's the one. They're like, I'm not sure he's the one. And they ask him, he's like, I don't think I'm the one. And it's this process by which he comes to understand, hold on a second, I just dodged those bullets. This is really interesting. What's going on here? Who am I? Well, he's been convinced in this place that you're a battery and you're in the simulation and you're Mr. Anderson and you work at a company and everything's green. And he comes to understand and to wake up and to realize who he is. And in a way, it's a picture of, like, many cases, have you woken up to the fact that you were created and it's not what you think? You are an agent of the creator himself. That you would rule and reign. What is ruling? You rule over things with decisions, right? But when you make decisions that are drawn off sides and you're literally emotionally charged and making these decisions, you're going your own way. And that's called sin. And what's amazing is, like, well, could I ask the one who created it all? Yes, you can. And actually, there's a lot that comes at that. Like, I'm really, really happy when you ask me because I'm going to give you a straight path. And I feel like for years and years and years, I've been like on a road and there's like guardrails kind of, and I just went going, I don't know if you felt that way. But a straight path is something I would like to have, right? Wouldn't it be nice to know where the pitfalls and all that stuff is? But what you come to realize, or what I've come to realize, is that it's built on this authority, your ability to make choice with him in the fullness of his nature and character, right? A gun sits on a table and until somebody picks it up and climbs a roof and decides to shoot. It's a nature and character. The reason why this whole assassination thing and this 20-year-old kid can't have just come up with it on his own is because there's a lot to this, right? You have to be convinced that this is the thing you're supposed to do, that you're supposed to kill and take another life. Think about the lies that had to be through that whole process and then the support and help to be able to get to this point, and then all of the other things that happened. To me, you recognize, hold on, it's a conspiracy. And what's amazing about this is, turns his head a split second before, catches his ear. And I did a stream about this. It's so interesting to me, it's the ear, right? Remember, the Judas has basically turned over Jesus to the Roman guard, and Peter's like, "I'm fighting for you, Jesus," and he lops off the ear of one of the guards. And literally, Jesus grabs that ear. You see this in the Passion of the Christ, right? I think it's incredible, and literally puts it up to his ear and heals his ear. Why are ears important? And I'm not saying this is true, but it just impressed upon me. President Trump, a lot of hubris, a lot of money, a lot of confidence, a lot of a representative of achievement and worldly things like golden toilet seats. And the humbling that is. I'm going to preserve your life, but I'm going to shoot a hole in your ear. Are you listening? Are you listening? Are you listening? Your ear is shot. You drop to your knees. You're bleeding. I'm just curious. What did the Lord say to him at that point? And he saw some things in his eyes after that when he came in for that first time on Tuesday. And I'm like, we'll see. But that's why it's so interesting is that you may have these experiences and all these things, but there's constantly lookalikes telling you, hey, no, you got this. You're Mr. Trump. You don't need to trust Jesus in this. You got this. You're the man. Those are the lies. And they're like, yeah, I am the man. I'll go my own way. I know how to do this. I'm smart. We actually need humble leaders who are, submitting to God. Because if you think about it, at the core of kind of this American experience, and which I think is really interesting, the West in general is built upon the law and built upon Christianity, the goodness of God. Is they said, if a man is ruled from within, he does not have to be ruled from without, meaning the state. And if you think about it, building this thing called America was built on the back of the fact that you have a mooring. You have an understanding of who your king is. Look at the Jews. We need a king. He needs to be handsome and tall like Saul. No. And they were frustrated. Think how frustrated they were. It's like, no, Jesus is our king. If he's the king of your heart, you don't need to be ruled by someone else. And so what is the battle that's happening? The global folks want to rule your heart. And a lot of people are saying, yeah, sign me up. Sign me up. I'd love for you to rule me. Right? I'll own nothing and be happy. Oh, yeah, I'm scared about the climate. No, this is the lie. This is the deception. The question is, who has the authority to speak to you? Who has the authority to speak to you? Does Satan have the authority to speak to you? Oh, no, he doesn't have the authority. Well, he speaks to you all the time and you believe it. So how do you discern things? One of the things that was probably the most pivotal moment for me with Steve was him saying, Matt, who has the authority to speak to you? I was like, well, Jesus has the authority to speak to me. Does he? And I found myself on my knees out loud saying, Jesus, only you have the authority to speak to me. But what's amazing is I feel like I go throughout the day and it's not like, oh, I got saved at one point in time. No, it's like a constant thing I have to continue to say. Because what happens is there's a guy showing up at my door, and this is figurative, and he's making me offers. Oh, yeah, look at this. You need to take this. But what I realize is the reason that sin is crouching at the door is because it doesn't have the authority to come in. You, God's man, had this authority, and you choose to open the door and let him in. Just because somebody makes you an offer doesn't mean that they own the place. You own the place. You have the authority. Are you giving it over? And do you have discernment to know the difference between the lookalikes? Please click on the link, join the Telegram, get the 1960s white paper, read it. Ask Jesus what he thinks about it. Don't take my word for it. Don't take Steve's word for it. If you want to listen to any of this stuff, you can. It's in podcast format. There are 37 episodes with Steve Staggs, and then the rest are just kind of this review like this. Let's see. There's a tool. You can go to stevestaggs.com and you can click on the search tool. It will search all of these 37 videos of Steve by words. If you want to do 2 words, you need to put it in quotes. It's kind of a natural language search, and you can see those specific things. You can learn. You can watch them directly. You can do whatever you want. But here's the bottom line. What you're going to hear is a guy going, this is the practice, and this is the result of this practice. And there's really, really good fruit from his life of doing this. But it's like, it's what I've been searching for all my life that I haven't found in church, because church was a constant kindergarten. And I know that sounds bad, sounds negative, but it serves a purpose. The goal is kind of onboarding. Steve talked about being 6 years old, and the pastor said, hey, would you like to meet Jesus? And he was 6 years old, and he's like, where is he? That's literally how he did. He's like, where's he? Where's he at? I'd love to meet him. Is he in the back? Well, that process of the local church was just saying, hey, come to him. But the problem is it's this perpetual listen to me thing. And it's like, what's the point of learning? What's the point of education? What's the point of onboarding if we aren't sent out? And when Jesus sent out the disciples, what did he say to them? Hey, don't take anything with you. What? You mean I don't need to be prepared with a bunker and a lot of food? No. Nope. Why? Because you do it with me. And when Jesus ascended, what did he say? He's like, I'm sending one to you, a counselor who will remind you of everything I said. Jesus is alive and he speaks. I mean, Jesus himself said this of his Father. He comes out of the wilderness. Satan knows he's hungry. He's a man. He's God. He's like, hey, give me your authority. Turn these stones into bread. And what does Jesus say? No, man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word that comes out of the mouth of God. He even said many times, he's like, I don't do anything unless I see the Father doing it or saying it. I only listen to it. Like, he was connected. He did it with him. He knew that he was going to the cross. He goes a stone's throw away from the disciples and to pray. And he's talking to his Father. He's conferring with him. He's having this conversation just like we can have with him. And he's like, hey, is there any other way we can do this? And we don't know what was said between them, but we know that he was changed. I learned something from Steve about what prayer really is. I approached prayer as like, hey, up there, give me what I want. No. We confer with one. And what ends up happening is his ways become our ways, his perspective, because he says, you've been seated with me in the heavenlies. Do you want to know my perspective? I'm a loving Father who will give you that. I want, like, are you interested in knowing my perspective? He's the truth, folks. And here's the cool thing. Don't take my word for it. Try him on for size. And that's why I always said that Steve made Jesus more accessible, because it didn't require that you jumped on one foot on Wednesdays of leap year. Like, oh, you got to have all this stuff together. No, just, are you interested? Look at the rich young ruler. He comes to Jesus and he's like, hey, man, what do I need to do to get saved? He's like, sell all your stuff and follow me. It just crushed him. He's like, I got a lot of stuff. I can't do that. And it's interesting. Are you willing to die to yourself? What is that idea of dying to ourself? Well, this idea that I've got all the answers and I go my own way. So how did I understand and come to realize this? Is because I tried all those things and they fail. The 47 laws of power. I've read this thing, The Art of War. Good luck to you. You might win a few battles, but you will be out of the game. His whole goal, you have life and life to its fullest. And I think about all of this stuff is like, what is the benefit of gaining the whole world and losing your soul? There's another way. Man, I'll tell you what, that's why I haven't been streaming about crypto, folks. Besides the fact that it, for the most part, is sucked up until around now. I'll probably start talking about it more as we get into, November-ish time. But folks, this is it. This is all there is. I mean, this is the truth. And it's like, all right, well, how do I learn this stuff? Well, I was frustrated when I met Steve because I'm like, hold on, you're hearing from Jesus all the time, and I'm having a hard time. Like, he's like, dude, I've been doing this for 40 years, and Jesus understands that, right? You don't bring a baby home from the hospital and they speak English, but there's communication that happens all that time, through the eyes of the parents and, all of these things. There's communication way beyond words. And I think we've put it into this thing that there's a group of people that have been gifted with this ability to hear from God, and I'm not one of them. That's a lie. You can be. Are you interested? Just ask him. He'll show you. But see, that's the thing that's really crazy is, I follow all this UFO stuff. I love all this, kind of science stuff and physics stuff and all of that stuff. But what is it? It's like, I want the knowledge so that I can get the patent to make the money, to have control and power. It's like, well, it's not going to help you if you lose your soul. And it's amazing to me that, all of these things are available to us if we, understand who we are in him. And I think that that's the coolest thing. There's so many people that not just gender identity, but just identity in general, like, young people. Young people are trying to figure out, well, what do I do? What should I do? And it's all generally related to careers. What do I do? Well, who have you been made to be? What do you do where you lose track of time? What are you just passionate about and have a facility for? I mean, some people can just like play instruments, and some people are really good at art, and some people are just have this natural ability to communicate or to encourage. And some people are very critical or analytical, and some people can take things apart, and some people are really good with their hands. Very rarely does any of that all appear in one person. And it's like, hold on, well, what if I had all these skills and abilities and natural capabilities that I've been given? And if I believe this to be true, then this was designed from the very beginning. That there's a plan of God through this whole thing, this whole story, and then there's a plan for you. The question is, are you interested in being a part of that story? And that's where life exists. And he doesn't judge as we judge, because I think a lot of people are thinking, well, I got to do something really important. I got to be the president, or I got to do something. No, you don't realize the value of, moments of care and concern and compassion and love, and how powerful and valuable those things are. I don't know what God's got planned. That's he'll tell you. So if I was advising young people, like someone that was newly out of high school or considering, what job and all that stuff, I'd say, hang on a second. Start by asking the one who created you what his plan is for you. And then daily check in with him. Hey, how we doing? I want to do this with you. We want to have life and life to its fullest. Doesn't mean you're not going to have any difficulties, but you're going to be able to see through those things and not have a panic button. And what is it that is the currency of all that? A peace that transcends all understanding, which will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Wow. Thank you, Steve Staggs. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Carter Hill. Folks, go into the Telegram and get the 1960s white paper and read it. And then we'll see you next Friday at 11 o'clock for Right Side Ups in honor of my good friend, Steve Staggs. Folks, take care of yourself. Have a great weekend, and do not mess with Texas. Take care, everybody.